Greetings, everyone. Professor Benavides here. Let's continue talking about Chapter 9, classes. We're going to be drilling down on importing classes. Very important topic. It's kind of like the beginning of modularizing things and creating smaller packages of things so that they can be reused more readily. So what happens is the general idea of this little section here is that as time goes on, our classes get bigger and bigger, or our files get bigger and bigger. So in order to keep things nice and neat, we have a tendency of partitioning these things into separate files, separate classes. But then the question is, how do we access the information? And that is through import statements. So that's the topic for this little section. So why import classes? Okay, that's the big question here. As you add more functionality to your classes, your files can get long, even when you use inheritance properly. In keeping with the overall philosophy of Python, you'll want to keep your files as uncluttered as possible. To help, Python lets you store classes in modules and then import the classes you need into your main program. So basically what we're going to end up with is files that have a class or classes, and then another file that will contain, as was referred to as the main program, in other words, where you instantiate your object and use dot notation to access the members of that object. Okay, so let's start off by talking about how we can import a single class. So first of all, we have to have a single class. Now, before I get going on this, there's a lot of files in this chapter. I'm not showing you this, but basically, if you want to get organized, what I did is whatever I'm working on, if I'm working on a particular project, I have a tendency of creating a folder and then just having the files that I need for that particular project in that particular folder. Otherwise, you may get a little confused with so many files. So let's talk about importing a single class. So before we do that, we have to find out what is the class that we're going to import. That's the car class. I put it in a file called car1.py because there were different versions of car. This particular file only has the car class. Remember that? The car class has an init method and then a variety of special behaviors. You know, we grew the car class before to include other, we grew this file to include other classes, or should I say we grew this module to include other classes, but this is very clean. This only has the car class. All right, so then what I do is in the other file, the first thing I do at the very top on this particular file, if you'll notice in line 3, I have an import statement. And it says from car1 import car. So what this does here is this gives us the ability to access that. It's kind of like, you remember when we had everything all in one file? Remember when we had the class car, and then we had the instantiation of the object all in one file. Okay, so now we have partitioned that. So then if we have partitioned that into a separate file, how do we access that? And the answer is through import statements. So from car1, that's the file that ends in py, import car. Notice how car starts with a capital letter because car is a class. And that is an important convention in object-oriented programming and in Python, that our classes begin with a capital letter. Okay. You'll notice I probably shouldn't need to review this, but on line 5, we have the instantiation of the object, and then we use the behaviors. We use dot notation to access the members of that object. So just to review what we have here again, on this file, we have just the car class. Of course, the class itself has, a doc string at the top. We include a module level doc string that briefly describes the contents of this module. You should write a doc string for every module. That's this. This is the module. This module level is not class level, right? So this is module level. This is inside the class, and this is inside the method, right? We refer to functions when they're in a class as methods. Remember that? So we have a doc string at the method level, right? Class level, right? Inside the class, and then module level. Okay. I guess I misspelled a few things. I'm just going to leave that there. So that's the class file. And then I call this the main file because it's where we instantiate the object. And that's where we create an instance of the class. This is where we must have the import statement. Okay, it's as easy as that. So the import statement tells Python to open the car module and import the car class. Now we can use the car class as if it were defined in this file. The output is the same as we saw earlier. In fact, let me go ahead and run that so you can see that. This is the same output as we had before. So what we do here is we instantiate an object, we pass Audi A4 2019, we get the descriptive name, that's this first line on here, and then I set the odometer reading to 23, so that's accessing an attribute directly, and then I access a method to read the odometer, right? And that is when we get this car has 23 miles on it if you were to go to that method definition. Let's see if I do. On a lot of other editors, you right mouse click on it and then go to definition. It should take you there. So yeah, it took us well, generally to that place. Usually it takes you exactly to that place. But okay, so that's the first idea on here. So the main idea here, let's make sure we get the main idea here. Importing classes is an effective way to program. Picture how long this program file would have been if the entire class were included. When you instead move the class to a module and import the module, you still get the same functionality, but you keep your main program file clean and easy to read. You also store the most of the logic in separate files. Once your classes work as you want them to, you can leave those files alone and focus on the higher level logic of your main program. So a lot of people like to have one file, one class, but as you can see, you can have a module and put many classes in it. It all depends on what your design is. And that's one of the things that the author talks about here is your design, and it's pretty much up to you as to how you want to design it, but you want it to do this as well organized as possible. Our next example here is storing multiple classes in a module. See, because this one here only has one class, right? So now we'll look at car 2, and we've seen this before. We have the car class, and I just collapsed it here. That was in car 1, right? We only had the car class. But now we add the battery class, and then we add the electric car class, which inherits from car. So we have some inheritance going on here, right? So the magic happens here in our main program, and we're going to call that my_electric car, because from here I'm going to instantiate an electric car. But before I can do that, I have to go ahead and do an import statement. So this is all about storing multiple classes in a module. I have the multiple classes in the file called car2.py. So let me go ahead and run this real fast. So as you see, we get the same output as we did before, but we had everything all in one file. We had not only the car class, the battery class, the electric car class, but we also had the instantiation and the dot notation to access the members, of this object. So what's different here is the modularity. When you cut things up into more manageable parts, it opens up the ability to reuse that in other projects. All right. So what we have here is a cleaner kind of approach, even though you're getting the same output as before. So to zero in on the topic for right now, it's storing multiple classes in a module. How do I access, this? We're going to go ahead and say from car to import electric car. In this particular case, we're only importing, one of them. But the first thing we need to realize is that we've got a class, and in that class we've got car, battery, and electric car. So we have them in a module. Usually all the classes in a module are kind of like related to each other. You typically don't want to be putting classes that are not related. For that matter, you probably should just put it in a separate file, a separate module, right? So after you create your classes, so you build your classes first all the time, OP, right? The OP is, if you haven't got any idea by now, basically you build your class first and then you instantiate an object off of that class. So now we're going to make a new file called my electric car. We're going to import the electric car class and make an electric car. So we say from car to import electric car, and that's a Tesla. The Tesla is an electric car. So let's go ahead and go to now remember, this is storing multiple classes in a module, but in this particular case we're only importing we're importing electric car, but it inherits from car, right? It inherits from car, and it also has an instance of it has an attribute as an instance right here on 65. So it's able to access the class called battery. Right? Let's go ahead and go on to our next example here. We'll go ahead and run it real fast. And we're talking here about importing multiple classes from a module. If you want to be real picky about what you want to import from a module, you can go ahead and say from, and then the file name, import car, comma, and then you list your classes. So this is an example of importing multiple classes from a module. And on line 5, we do simple OOP. We create a class. We create an object off of that represents a car. That's simple object-based programming, and there's no inheritance going on in line 5, right? And then in line 8, we go ahead and create an instance of the electric car, which inherits from car. So we're utilizing inheritance in the second example. But of course, the thing we want to zero in on here is the import statement on line 3, which is the syntax for this would be from file name import class, comma, etc., where you import multiple classes. So you can import as many classes as you need into a program file. If we want to make a regular car and an electric car at the same in the same file, we need to import both classes, the car and the electric car. You import multiple classes from a module by separating each class with a comma. Once you've imported the necessary classes, you're free to make as many instances of each class as you need. In this example, we make a regular Volkswagen Beetle and an electric Tesla Roadster. I guess he likes Teslas, right? All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at our next example here. We're going to talk about importing an entire module. So in a way that's kind of simple, and I don't know about you, but I like simple. So in this particular case, the only thing that's different is line 3, import car2. And it's really car, but I separated car1 from car2. And so car1, and the way I did it, contains only the car class, and car2 contains the car class, the battery class, and the electric car class, which inherits from car. So importing an entire module, you can also import the entire module and then access the classes you need using dot notation. This approach is simple and results in code that is easy to read, because every call that creates an instance of a class includes the module name. You won't have naming conflicts with any names used in the current file. You don't want naming conflicts. You get really confused. I get confused with that. So this is probably, this is the one that I use, I'm going to say almost exclusively, right? So it goes like this. Once I import my module, then basically I'm going to go ahead and use the module name, the dot operator, and then access the class that I want, right? And the dot notation should help you. Most editors, like I'll just say, you know, for example, if I say my car gets car2 dot, and most editors will give you, this one didn't at this time, but you never know with Sublime. You'll get a drop down showing you, you know, the members of that car, so that you can go ahead and you know, import them, or not import them, but use them, right? So module name dot and then class, and then you go ahead and then create your object on here. And that was a great example of how Sublime just doesn't offer as much help. It seems like I've noticed that you got to like type it in once to be able to get the IntelliSense going on here. So that makes Visual Studio Code the place where you're going to end up with, or really, you know, what is it? There's so many other editors. What is the one that a lot of people use? PyCharm? Yeah, but that requires a little bit more processing power. So I wouldn't put that PyCharm on a weak computer. Stick with Sublime, move up to Visual Studio Code, and then think about, you know, something, you know, trendy, like, you know, a Jupyter Notebook, right? Or the PyCharm was built exclusively for, you know, Python, so you're probably going to have to taste it to see if you like it. Okay. So we use dot notation here. That's the main idea here. You type in that period, and I was trying to demo it here, but it did not want to cooperate, as you saw in Sublime. So how would we import all classes from a module? That's our next example here. This method is not recommended. Line 3, from car2 import asterisk, and you know asterisk is the wildcard. So notice we don't use dot notation here. So this method is not recommended for 2 reasons. First, it's helpful to be able to read the import statements at the top of a file and get a clear sense of which classes a program uses. With this approach, it's unclear which classes you're using from a module. This approach can also lead to confusion with names in a file. If you accidentally import a class with the same name, oh my, right, as something else in your program file, you can create errors that are hard to diagnose. I show this here, you know, or your author shows this to you here, because even though it's not a recommended approach, you're likely to see it in other people's code at some point. So if you need to import many classes from a module, you're better off importing the entire module and using the module name dot class name syntax. You won't see all of the classes used at the top of the file, but you'll see clearly where the module is used in the program. You'll also avoid the potential naming conflicts that can arise when you import every class into a module. So then that brings us to importing a module into a module. And I'm going to go ahead and transfer over to Visual Studio Code because I think we've gone as far as we can, with this idea here. So how do we import a module into a module? Okay, let's go ahead and take it. Sometimes, let me give you like the rationale here. So sometimes you'll want to spread out your classes over several modules to keep any one file from growing too large and avoid storing unrelated classes in the same module. When you store your classes in several modules, you may find that a class in one module depends on a class in another. When this happens, you can import the required class into the first module. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at this. I guess maybe I should show you car first. Remember car? This, and this is in a separate, I have this in a separate folder. That's why it's not overriding the other ones. This module only has one class called car. Okay, so in electric car, and before, remember, we had class car, class electric car, class battery, right? So what we're doing is we're partitioning everything into separate files now. If you partition this, we want to bring, let's say we put electric car in a separate file. In that case, we want to go ahead and say from car, that file called car, import car, right? So that when I instantiate an electric car, it can find car, because otherwise it's not going to find car. So what we're doing here is we're importing a module into a module. So you see, in other words, there's no main here. You see this? This is only contains battery, class battery, and class electric car. Remember a long time ago we had class car, class battery, class electric car, and then we had the instantiations all in one file, and it got really big, right? Really long file. And what we're doing now is just cutting it up, okay, into separate, ideas, right? On here. So let's go ahead and look at how we actually use this in a main. So we'll in this, I'll call it a main file here. This has the higher level logic. So we'll say from car, import car, from electric car, import electric car. And we're doing that for two reasons. Number one, I'm creating just a simple object-based class right here on line 4. That's why I need car. I need the second import statement to go ahead and create an electric car. Okay? So when I run this, let me go ahead and run this. I get down here below the 2019 Volkswagen Beetle and the 2019 Tesla Roadster. Pretty much what I did before. So again, this import statement, the first one has to do with these two lines of code right here. Right? So line 4 creates just a simple class because it's my Beetle is based on car. That doesn't involve any kind of inheritance or anything like that. So it's just simple based, object-based programming. That's why we need line 1. We need line 2 from electric car. That's a file that contains, remember the electric car, that contains the battery and the electric car. And when we import electric car, we get everything. We get the inheritance chain on here. Let me go ahead and show. When we import electric car, it inherits from car, and it also has an attribute based upon an instance of battery. So we're able to go ahead and use the class battery as well. All right, so that brings us to Alias, and this, a lot of people like aliases. We kind of covered that a similar concept to this before with methods and functions. So as you saw in chapter 8, aliases can be quite helpful when using modules to organize your project code. You can use aliases when importing classes as well. As an example, consider a program when you where you want to make a bunch of electric cars. It might get tedious to type and read electric car over and over and over again, so you can give electric car an alias in the import statement. Okay, so here's the magic that we're talking about right here, line 4. So we'll say this is the same code from before. The only thing that's changed is that is the as here, right? Let me show you the one from before so you can contrast that. So it says from electric car, import electric car. Now we say from electric car, import electric car as EC, and the EC stands for the electric car. So whenever I need to create an object based upon the electric car, I say EC. I don't have to type in electric car. Okay, so that's an alias. I think a lot of programmers like that feature, especially in the past where you didn't have a lot of IntelliSense that was helping us. So that's kind of like bringing us to the end of this chapter before the try it yourselves. So as far there's the last section on here was kind of important. It was called finding your own workflow. In other words, how do you attack things? And he only talked about this with words, but basically a lot of professional level programmers, when you're doing software development and designing a large project, you're probably going to need to use some design tools like UML, Unified Modeling Language, where you can represent your algorithm graphically and then translate that into code. See, and he hasn't introduced that idea because he's keeping things simple in this book, but he touches on this idea. So as you can see, Python gives you many options for how to structure code in a large project. It's important to know all these possibilities so you can determine the best ways to organize your projects, as well as understand other people's projects. When you're starting out, keep your code structure simple. Try doing everything in one file and moving your classes to separate modules once everything is working. That's so-so. I mean, I don't know if I could recommend that, but I think it's a natural tendency to do that, especially when you haven't had any pre-thought about your algorithm. But if you do this from a real computer science point of view, you will study the problem, map it all out, and you're already partitioning it rather than just banging it out, okay? But I know this is at our level right now, this is a very typical situation where you start banging it out, you got this big old huge file, and then you say, hey, you know what? I could partition this up and create better reuse of my code for the future. If you like how modules and files interact, try storing your classes in modules when you start a project. Find an approach that lets you write code that works and go from there. So one of the things that he does, he kind of lightly touches on, he says, you can go ahead and then concentrate on the higher logic, and because the details are in the modules, that creates code reuse. And that's one of the major ideas in object-oriented programming, is the ability to have things in modules and that they're clean classes that can be used for multiple purposes. All right, so let's talk about try it yourself 9-11, imported restaurant. Using your latest restaurant class, let's go ahead and look at the restaurant class. Using your latest restaurant class, store it in a module. Make a separate file that imports restaurant. Make a restaurant instance and call one of restaurant's methods to show that the import statement is working properly. So let's look at the structure of this. I've got one class in this module called restaurant. It's got an init method and a variety of special methods. And we've got this from the earlier part of the chapter. Then we create, I'm going to go ahead and call it a main program. I like to call these the service. That's because I'm coming from Java. I can't get that out of my head. Those are the words that we were taught. We create classes, we call them the service, and then when we use them in the separate file, the main file, we call that the client. So here in this main file here, I'm going to have an import statement in order to use the restaurant class. I say from restaurant. Remember, this is the file name. You just don't have to put in the .py. So you say from this file name, import restaurant. So I'm going to go ahead and then on line 3, I'm going to create an instance of restaurant. And this is simple object-based programming. No inheritance, no multiple inheritance, none of that stuff, right? Then on line 4, we go ahead and access a special method and another special method. Let me go ahead and run this real fast so you can see the output. So it says down below, the club is open, come on in. Actually, that's the second line. The first line says the channel club serves wonderful steak and seafood. That would be the line 4 executing, and then line 5, open restaurant, gives me the channel club is open, come on in. Okay. Let me go ahead and see if I can simulate that dot notation that I tried to do in Sublime. I know that when you sometimes the dot notation works. It may have been just a bad demo day, right? So notice I'm getting a lot more help right away here. I can go ahead and just use that down arrow here and press the tab key. See how I got that typed in? So I'm getting a lot of help for typing. When I put in this period, I'm not getting the drop down here. I'm not wondering, why on that. So if I say, oh, I have to type in the first character, or maybe I was spooking myself out. It's kind of hard to remember that. So then I press the tab key and it typed the whole thing in, right? So let me try that again. If I go, channel club, period, and then put in the first. I would have liked something that would just have the drop down of everything, because that's the editors that I've used in Java. As soon as you type in that period, boom, you get like a massive, drop down on here that I'm not seeing on here. Maybe it's just too early in the morning, but that's dot notation. Dot notation is one of the most important topics in object-oriented programming. But let's stick to the topic. Right now, we're zeroing in on line 1, and we're doing simple based, object-based programming, and we're creating an object based upon a class. And what makes it happen is the import statement on line 1. What we did is we put the class called restaurant in a separate module. And typically, remember, a module can contain one or more classes that are typically related. Okay, so let's go ahead and go to 911. And I'm going to go ahead and close some of these so I can see a little bit better. Okay. So 911, it says, imported admin. Start with your work from exercise 9.8. Store the classes user, privileges, and admin in one module. Create a separate file. Make an admin instance and call show privileges to show that everything is working correctly. Okay, so first of all, I guess I need to verify that this file has everything that I think it's got. So in user, user. In user, what do I have? I've got a class called user, right? I also have a class called admin, and I see that admin is inheriting from user, right? And then I see, this is kind of like a mirror image of that electric car battery idea. It's amazing how parallel this is, because you can see privileges is then used to create an attribute. So this is an attribute as an instance that occurs on line 47. Okay. So this particular module has 3 classes in it, and it doesn't contain any instantiation in this file. It's separated. So how do we use the classes? In a file called my_user, I put an import statement. From user, import admin. So what that allows me to do is on line 3, I'm able to create an object called Eric. or as he calls an instance. Hopefully you get, there's a lot of vocabulary. I know it's a lot of vocabulary. So when we, when some says, when the author says, make an admin instance, you're creating an object. Some people call it a variable. It's an object, right? And we, after we create the object, we use dot notation to access the members, in that class, right? Or that you've for the instance of that class. So Eric has been created on line 3, and then on line 4, I go ahead and describe that user, and then I go ahead, because privileges was not populated. If you look at it, go back over here and look at privileges. I created a list here, but it was not populated. Okay, it's an attribute, but it's not populated. It doesn't have anything in it. So here I go ahead and create my list, and then I assign that list to eric.privileges.privileges. Okay, that is how I end up putting all this in there. And then I go ahead and do a print statement for the username, and then I call eric.privileges.showPrivileges. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. Here's the show privileges. Okay, and this is the init method. In the init method, we have one attribute called privileges. Okay, it's a list, and when we make it, there's nothing in it. That's why in the main program, we go ahead and populate it, and then assign it to that particular attribute. All right. Let me go ahead and run it. So there we go. We've got so on line 4, when that executes, that gives us this Eric Mathis username, email, location. Then line 13 says the admin E Mathis has these privileges, and we call the show privileges method. So this is then loaded up into the instance variables, all right, or into the instance variable. And show privileges, if you look at it, has a little loop in there. And this is the same kind of loop that we've learned before. The only thing different is we've got self, and remember, self represents the current instance. So we're saying for privileges in privileges, and then just print the privilege, right? And that's what gives us can reset password, can moderate discussions, can suspend accounts. So that's 9.11. 9.12 says store the user class in one module and store privileges and admin in separate modules. Oh, now we're cooking with gas, right? Okay, so we go on to this next example here, and I put this in separate folders, guys. Because you're saying, well, oh, that's the same file. Aren't they going to overwrite? Well, remember when I did car 1 and car 2? Well, those were in the same folder, so I renamed them. But because I wanted them to be clean for that particular project, I mean, you got to be, or at least I think that my compulsiveness has paid off. I like folders. It's a way for me to get things organized, and when I'm dealing with a particular project, I like to put everything in that folder. I guess maybe see I could simulate that. I'm gonna go file open. It sees that I'm working only on right now on I was working on 9_11, right? So now we're moving. We're going to go ahead and move to the next example here, which is 9.12. All right, so we've got user, and let me just collapse everything so that we can see it better. See what is inside user. I've got the user class only. So you remember before how we had more things in here? I only got you, and this is following. There's an extreme parallel. This guy must be very compulsive too, because we're doing an extreme parallel to the car, battery, electric car analogy. Now we're having user, right? And then in the admin, we're gonna use inheritance, and then we have privileges, and the privileges on line 14, we're creating an attribute as an instance of privileges, of the privileges class. Okay, so how do we go ahead and use all this? Let's go ahead and look at that. Let me come back over here. From this one here, in the admin.py, I've got to import user. Now we can, if you only had one file, you wouldn't need to do this, right? You could just have everything all in here. But remember, we're going along with the story that these classes are getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. So you're better off partitioning them into separate modules. And in this particular case, these two go together because you'll notice there on line 14, I need to have the privileges class there. Otherwise, I'd have to do another import statement. Okay, so let's just keep it really simple and go to the main. And in main, I have from admin import admin, which is fine because that one then imports user, which is the missing. I need user in order to create to utilize inheritance on line 6. See, because class admin inherits from user, right? So on line 3, I create an instance of admin, call it Eric, and then I say describe user, and then I put in the privileges. Go ahead and run this. And, this is pretty much the same idea here. But he's just taking it up a notch to go ahead and do examples of more partitioning, right? So the idea here is that we're importing admin, and when we import admin, then we can go ahead and use dot notation on here. Okay, so again here we have the instance on line 3. We use the instance the method describe user to describe the user, which gives us this Eric Mathis stuff. Then I populate the list. I feed the list to the attribute. Okay, and then I go ahead and then have an output that shows Eric.username, which is the instance. And then I use the dot notation to go ahead and show the privileges. All right, my friends, so that's pretty much it. For this particular section, we only have one more section in this chapter, and we'll be summarizing everything in the next video. So see you in the next video. Thank you very much. Hopefully you picked up a thing or two. Bonsoir.